you can't have hindsight until you're there. But I would say that every single person I've talked to who's homeschooled and not quit would say, and myself included, I don't regret it for 1 second. And if I could do it all over again, I would 1000% choose to do it the same way. Even with learning the philosophy as you go. I didn't know anything about educational philosophy when we started. I didn't even know there was other educational philosophies. Even not having all the information and not knowing the things that I know now, I do not regret for 1 second. I think that kids thrive at home, and so do parents when their kids are at home.
My name is Lisa, mother of 8 and creator of the blog and YouTube channel Farmhouse on Boone. On this podcast, I like to talk about simplifying your life so you can live out your priorities. I help you learn how to cook from scratch and decorate on a budget through this podcast and my courses, Simple Sourdough and the Simple Sewing series. I also help people reach their goals from home through my business course, YouTube Success Academy. I will leave links to these resources in the show notes and description box below. Now let's get into the show. Today we are having Ginny from 1000 Hours Outside back on the show to talk about her new book, Homeschooling. You're Doing It Right Just by Doing It. Such a great book. I just got it. I'm already halfway through it. It's an encouragement for any of you who are either considering homeschooling or maybe you are in the middle of it, in the thick of it. You're feeling burnt out, discouraged, doubting yourself, fearful. I think that this is like run to get this book right now. I'm not kidding. It's one of those books that can change how you think about education, and has, for me, that kind of philosophy thinking with education, what's the goal of this, is what shaped how we moved through the years that we've homeschooled. So without further ado, let's jump into this interview with Ginny Yurich. All right, Ginny, welcome back on. I'm so excited to have you back on the show. I know the listeners will be very happy about it too. I actually just got the book, your new book, yesterday, and I'm already about halfway through it, and I can tell that it's going to mean a lot, be very encouraging to a lot of people. So we'll jump into that. For those who don't know you, I think everybody at least knows about your movement. Tell the listeners who you are.
Okay, I'm a mom. That's it, mostly. I started this movement a long time ago called 1000 Hours Outside, and for a long time it did not take off. But in the past several years, it has definitely grown to become a global movement. It is about reclaiming childhood, bringing back balance between screens and getting kids outside, and really reclaiming that family time and giving people a fuller life. But more than that, I'm just a mom. We've got 5 kids, and I love being a mom. We're a homeschooling family, and somehow I ended up here, and it is a blessing and an honor to get to talk with people like you and to get to talk with a lot of people that are influencing childhood and the ways that we structure this growing up period.
Okay, so your new book, when does it release? I know it
releases a week from today of the time that we're doing this podcast.
Okay, so when this comes out, it'll be fully out. So yeah, tell us just a little bit about your new book, and then we're going to dive way into it because it's a topic that gets me very excited. It's like a page turner for me. So I don't know, maybe I'm a nerd. I love stuff like this. And I can tell that you and I see education very similarly. And even though it all seems very straightforward, somewhat intuitive, I think it's hard for a lot of us to, we were raised in a certain model, we were plugged into it. And then to shift our focus is a whole new unlearning. So yeah, tell us a bit about your book.
Sure. There are all sorts of different philosophies of education, aren't there? And I didn't realize that. I had no idea. I thought there was one, and it was the one that I did and the one that everyone around me did, though I did have homeschooling friends growing up through church. And interestingly, we never talked about homeschooling, really. Certainly never talked to their parents or even any of the other kids. But long before I had a movement or a podcast or any types of books or anything, we made the choice to homeschool. And I think like a lot of people, even if you grew up homeschooling, but you didn't quite know maybe why your parents did it or why they made those choices, or if you grew up in a completely different system, you feel nervous. You feel really nervous that you're going to mess your kids up, that you're going to lose yourself in the process, that it's a big old mistake. You're making a big mistake. And we are in the years of hindsight at this point. We are close to the end of high school. For our oldest, we've got several teens. And I feel like even though I didn't do every day right, and even though I didn't make every decision right, that on a whole, when you look at the whole picture and you look at the whole timeline, that simply by pulling your kids out of a systematic way of learning and choosing home education, you're doing a lot of things right long before you pick your curriculum, long before you even know that there's other philosophies of education. There are so many things that you're doing right. And so that's the message that I want to share.
So your book is called Homeschooling. You're doing it right just by doing it. This was something that I was told when we decided to homeschool when I was pregnant with my first child. So long ago, 17 years ago, it was like, for sure, we're going to homeschool. And I was talking to somebody at church. I think this was a few years later when she was already maybe like 2 or 3. And a mom there said something very similar to me. And at that time, it's very hard to relate to that sentiment. Like it's easy for, you and me, not that I'm on the other side of it by any stretch, because I still have little kids, but I also do have kids who are mostly through school as well. And it's a lot different on the other side. There's a wisdom and a perspective that you gain just by being around children and seeing their natural curiosity and finding out that they learn things all the time without your input. I remember my first was just a baby, thinking that I had to show her how to crawl and literally getting on the ground and putting my arm and my leg and my arm and my leg, which is hilarious. But we do that with everything else until we realize that they figure out how to crawl no matter what you do for the most part. And like your book says, neurotypical kids figure out how to crawl, how to walk. And then it's the same for a lot of other things that we don't apply that same knowledge to.
Mhm. We might have no idea. I had no idea. John Holt has a book called Learning All the Time, how young kids learn to it's a read, write, do math, and investigate the world without being taught. And I read that book and I remember thinking, yeah, right. Especially when I had just seen the title. Yeah, right. They can learn to read without being taught, but it is the truth. Dr. Peter Gray says kids are biologically designed to self educate, and we don't know that as a society because we don't give enough time for that to happen.
Yeah. And I've found it fascinating pretty much the entire time that I've been homeschooling that there's really not a discussion. Well, there's more of a discussion now. There wasn't as much of a discussion when we were first starting. It was the choice to be defended. It wasn't the other way around. You weren't having, a conversation two-way where you're like, okay, now you defend to me why you think this is a better model, and then I'll defend you why. No, it was just, you must defend why you are doing it this way. This way is the standard. This way works. We're sure of it. And then you're choosing the rogue way. So tell me why that's okay. And I think in some ways, your book and a lot of books of a similar trying to, educate people on the different philosophies of education, flip it. And it's kind of presenting a different way as a valid choice.
Mhm. Right. Like, explain to me why it makes the most sense for kids to be all together the same age for their whole childhood, like that type of a thing. And that's not necessarily even an argument I want to go down. I mean, people have all sorts of reasons why they make their choices. It's more for the person who feels nervous or who is homeschooling and feels burnt out and feels like, man, I must be doing it wrong. I might not be doing this right. I'm probably going to mess up my kid. And to really give that solid assurance that, no, there's so many things that you're doing right just by making that choice.
Yes, and that is what I gained with your book was the encouragement that I've spoken to so many homeschool moms, as I'm sure you have as well, who come with a lot of fear, with a lot of confusion, with a lot of self-doubt. And I agree. When I read your book, I think, oh, this would be great for that conversation I just had recently with so and so who was really worried that her child wasn't meeting this made up metric that, like your book says, there's no studies later that show that at what point you do a certain thing, as long as at some point that you can, it's going to make any difference down the road. So yes, this book is for those who feel overwhelmed and fearful by homeschooling. And I remember those days. I feel very on the other side of those days in a lot of ways. Like now, yes, there's day-to-day things that we have to address and think about, but that overarching fear of, am I completely messing everybody up? That's laid aside at this point, just from the proof that I have seen on the other side of it. I'm sure you probably agree.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And the things that I've learned along the way that a lot of these things that maybe society would look at and say that's a deficit. It's a deficit that you're not filling your child's time with all of these extracurriculars and you don't have every minute planned of their day. It's not all planned out. It would seem as though that's a deficit because some kids are in a school classroom where the teacher has taken 8 hours of a day, 7 hours of a day, and planned out every single minute. And so it seems like, well, maybe this is a fail. It's not good enough. But this, and I would say that you would say probably the same thing. It's a hindsight in seeing how our kids have turned out, but then also learning along the way that those things that often seem like a deficit really, especially today when the job market is changing so rapidly, that these things are actually a jumping off board for our kids. They are a benefit. It's not a deficit. It's actually something that's really good for them.
I think there's some stat in your book that 65% of jobs that will exist in some year that isn't that far off, I forget the exact year, don't exist now. And it's interesting that with this rapid change, which we've all witnessed, it's like whiplash. Like even 5 years ago was a whole different world than it is now, that we haven't changed anything about our model and our approach to instilling creativity. Like you talked about, okay, this maybe is a deficit in the other direction. And I think it takes seeing kids with some boredom and free time to even believe it. So, because a lot of people will say, yes, but if you don't, regiment out every single moment, then they'll do X, Y, Z. I'm like, have you tried it? Have you tried this? Right?
Right. Right. Well, even today, so I'm in the period of a book launch, which I know you relate to these types of things where you have a little bit of a season that's a little busier than others. So it's book launch season. This book comes out in a week. And so today, pretty much, I've got a bunch of different podcasts. I normally wouldn't have that on a Tuesday. And so our youngest daughter, she came up to me earlier this morning and gives me this book. It's like a comic, blank comics and all these different kind of I'm like, I haven't seen this in years. It's all these blank boxes and then they're in different shapes. And she was like, I wrote a comic strip. And I was like, where did you find this? She said, I found it under the couch. And I was like, oh my gosh. So she wrote this whole comic strip about this dog named Doug. And the whole thing is there. I mean, she's page and page. She colored it in. It's a superhero. He's flying. And you're like, that that's something that counts as something.
Yeah.
And this would be a day where I would maybe feel more like a failure. Like, okay,
You
she's a
kind of
little bit
luck.
on her own. Now she's
Yeah.
not super young, but she's a little on her own. It's not structured. I'm not even there for a couple of the hours I'm doing these podcasts. And yet she found something. She was resourceful. She looked under the couch. I mean, maybe there's great things under the couch. And here she is working on her spelling, working on her creativity, coloring, her fine motor. So many things are happening in what others would be considered maybe me failing.
Yeah, I actually notice my kids doing stuff all the time that I'm like, that would be a school project, but I would have to, when I was a kid, they would have had to make me do. Like, because right there, that's something that I could imagine there was something like that somewhere along the line. They're like, okay, take this, and now I want you to write your own. And we would have been like, ugh, when's it due? Like, what day? I got to start working on it. And my kids constantly are doing things that I'm like, you guys are doing school projects. Like you don't even realize it.
On their own accord. Why?
Yes,
well,
on their
because
own
learning,
accord.
because learning is fun and learning releases dopamine and it's great to learn new things. But so often it has to be on your own timeline and within your own interest. And when someone else imposes and says, you have to do this now, it changes the whole thing.
Well, you were talking about in your book, our fear about things being measured and recorded. And of course, there are state laws. So there is a certain amount of stuff that you have to actually record and measure. But us feeling like we're doing a good job only if, like, okay, if you had written out before today, while I'm busy with my podcast, like, let's say like 2 months ago, you were really organized and you knew that you were having a book launch. So you wrote out what your kids were going to do on this day. And you wrote down, I want such and such kid to, because I've noticed she's kind of creative with writing, I want her to make her own comic strip. And so then you get up and you have like this whole list of things that they have to do. And for some reason that feels better and that feels responsible. But then letting them find this and self-direct it is the opposite of that, even if what they produce might end up being the same thing. She practiced her writing, she practiced spelling, she practiced creativity. She solved her boredom problem.
Right. Right. Yes. And I was just talking to someone who said, at some of these top companies where they're looking to hire people, they're looking at things like creativity. They're looking at things like empathy. Those are the types of things that they're looking for, and those are immeasurable. You cannot measure someone's empathy, really. You cannot really measure creativity. I mean, I know there's been tests and things like with NASA, so I guess in some ways they can measure creativity, but that's not what's on the report card.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what's coming home in the school report card. It's like they got a 4.0. Creativity, empathy, it can be measured, but it's not what we measure. And yet, those are the things that matter. They say the competency of the future is relational. Do you have good social skills? That's not on the report card either. And so we have misaligned, I think, what is needed now, what's needed in the future. Like you brought up that statistic about jobs that don't exist. There's another statistic that 75% of jobs in 2035. I mean, that
That's
is
not
not that
far.
far. No, these are our kids. This is our
Yeah.
kids' adulthood. That 75% will be entrepreneurs or have their hands in many different pots. That's what Kim John Payne says. And so the skills that you need in that type of a work environment are not the ones that come home on the report card. They're pretty immeasurable. Are you resilient? Do you have grit? And can you come up with something out of nothing? Can you pivot? Are you flexible? And those are the things that we don't measure for kids. And some of them we can and some of them we can't, but whether we can or can't, we just don't.
Well, and if kids don't have free time and aren't bored, they will never exercise that skill of what do I do self-directed with my time? Because every moment of my time has been designated by someone else. And this is not new. This was exactly my upbringing. I remember when I first got married and I was just in this house all day, not this house, but a house. I did not know what to do with my time. And I was just like desperate to find some kind of job, like something where somebody would tell me what to do. And it took years for me to figure out that there were so many things that I loved within just something I could come up with. I realized I was creative. I never really knew that. And of course, you can learn those things later. But I think teaching that skill, which basically just means, letting them go and providing an environment that isn't full of structure is what actually produces that.
And that is what people would say is the deficit, right? You say, like, you don't really have to teach it. And that is one of the chapters of the book. So the premise of the book is all of these things that you're doing right simply by choosing home education. And you're not really doing anything. You are letting them have some time. It's not that you have to even teach it. And one of them is that you are providing this self-reliance. The kid is going to become reliant on their inner workings. And to your point, you became an adult, you lost some years. If you would have known what you loved back then, you have all that time to dive into it. I feel the same way with entrepreneurship and having a business. And I would imagine you're similar. You've got this business, you've got your podcast, products, you got put out courses, you're teaching people about sourdough, and everything's always in flux and changing in the internet. And there's no one to tell you what to do. No one.
Nope.
No one says, today, this is what you're
Yes.
going to do. You should hire this person. You need to look, you should talk to this business coach. You need to do this course for social media. You get zero direction as an entrepreneur, except for what you maybe pay for. And then you have to decide, is it worth it for me to pay for this coach or this help or whatever? All those decisions are on you. And if you don't have practice, I felt the same way. I went from being in the school system to being in the school system in
Mm-hmm.
college to being back in the school system, and everything was step by step laid out. And when all of a sudden it was like, do something different, I was like, ooh, I don't really know how to do that.
Yes. And maybe that would have worked 30, 40, 50 years ago. Even when I graduated college, I mean, I feel like that was right on the cusp of when everything started changing so dramatically. But people graduated, they got this specific or certain job that went with their degree, and then they worked at that job until their retirement. And it's a whole different world where people no longer carry the same job for, even if it's a corporate job, but they change jobs. I think there was some stat in your book about that. So this different environment requires a different approach to how we're like training these flexible, creative, problem solving type of kids.
Yeah, it sure does. I think they say that there's about 6 to 7 careers someone will have in a lifetime. That's careers, that's not jobs. 6 to 7 careers.
Careers.
So that
Yeah.
means you have a lot of different coworkers and bosses and clients. So your relational skills matter. You have to be able to be on your toes. And there's a lot of statistics about how college is more optional than it used to be, that 7% of jobs require a college degree legally, only 7%. And so there's 93% of jobs that you could possibly get without one. But you're going to have those people skills, and you're going to have to be able to go in and fill in gaps and know what to do and be self sufficient. And that assembly line approach that kind of led to an line type job, that's not the world we're in anymore.
Yeah. We can all feel it. We can all sense it. Even if we maybe didn't think that was happening 10, 15 years ago, we all realize it now. But a lot of people are on the fence about homeschooling because they have a lot of misconceptions about it. What's the biggest misconception about homeschooling that you hope your book will correct?
That you can do it wrong. I don't think you can do it wrong. I think
Ooh,
that you
that's a
can do
relief.
I think that there are certain things that you can do wrong. Like I think you can have curriculum that doesn't fit your kid and their learning style and but over time, over the course of a whole childhood, you correct because you love your kids and you make adjustments. So have there been seasons where I've been like, that didn't really work, or that didn't really work for that kid, or I should have done it differently, or yes, absolutely. But as a whole, the whole picture is that your kid has grown and been loved and had all of these advantages because of they were pulled out of that assembly line standard, the standardized system. I really truly believe that if you love your kids, you're not going to do it wrong and you're not going to gravely mess them up. I also think there's misconceptions, and this isn't a focus of the book, but I think this is an important one. The biggest misconception that you hear about all the time is that homeschoolers are weird. And
Yeah,
you
I
hear
feel
that
like
a
that
lot.
one's changing. Like, I think even people that have been very weird about homeschooling in my own life, I think that like the whole perception of homeschooling, I think has become more mainstream. So in some ways, maybe, but yes, that was the biggest one when we started. I mean,
Yeah,
by
they're going to
far.
be weird, but I think it's important to talk about because there is a reason that misconception existed, and to some degree may still exist, and it's because for a period of time homeschooling was illegal, and so
Right.
the parents and the families who chose to do it
They
did
were,
it illegally. They did it
yeah,
against the law, and so they hid. They hid in their homes. It's actually what they
right.
did in the 80s and in the early
Yeah.
90s. This was illegal in many states across the country for a very long time. So those kids spent their entire day indoors with their
Mm-hmm.
siblings and didn't go out into the community until all of the other kids were out of school. And so, yeah, of course, the nature of that would possibly create kids that are a little different. Of course, they're going to be a little different than a child who was in a public school system for those same 13 years. That has changed. That has
Yes.
changed dramatically. It is no longer illegal. It hasn't been illegal for decades at this point. And so now we're really starting to see the kids who went through it in a legal way where they were able to be out in the community and in co-ops and in interfacing with other people at the store and with family and with friends and with neighbors and different groups. And so I think it's important to know that stigma
Mm-hmm.
was created from a special
Yeah.
set of circumstances that no longer exist.
That's an important point I hadn't really thought about. I also figured if you chose to homeschool when it was illegal, you were an extra committed person to it, right? So maybe there was some motivations behind it that were even stronger than some of us today, where it's like, you can choose to homeschool or you can choose to send your kids to school. It's not as drastic of a choice as it was back then, obviously, if it was actually illegal. All right, taking a quick break to tell you about something that we love in our home to stock our pantry, our fridge, our freezer with high quality, nourishing ingredients, things like grass-fed butter and cheese and raw cheese and cream and grains, whole grains, and that is Azure Standard. if you aren't familiar yet, Azure Standard works like a co-op model. So like-minded individuals all pool and order together and meet at a drop location where a big truck comes in and brings all of your goods that you probably have a hard time sourcing locally. If, like me, you like to mill your own grains or consume grass-fed raw cheese, it can be hard to find those things in your local area, but there are a lot of people who likely already in your area enjoy and want those things. And so if you go over to the Azure Standard website, azuresstandard.com, you will likely find that there's already a drop location in your area. We have several in our area, not very far away. If there isn't one, which there likely will be, you can start one, pulling together people who also want these awesome products in their home, don't know where to get them. This is a great solution for you. I want you to go over to the Azure Standard website, again, azuresstandard.com. Check out their seasonal produce. Check out the great prices on a 50-pound bag of hard white wheat. They have smaller quantities too, but if you want to get started in some of that stuff and some of the sourcing, this is a great place to start. Azure Standard is offering Simple Farmhouse Life listeners 15% off your first order of $100 or more to a drop location with the code SIMPLE15. There will be a link in the show notes below for you to check this out and get in on this special deal. If you've ever wanted to try Azure Standard, now is the perfect time. Again, use the code SIMPLE15 over at azurestandard.com. All right, back to the show. There was something in your book about, you mentioned interacting with siblings in different ages and empathy. And in the book, you talked about schools that are like bringing babies in to expose kids to babies, which is somewhat funny just because like that's a thing that if you're out in the world, you're going to come across babies and, interact with them. Do you remember the importance of that in your
Yes,
study?
I love this. Yes, absolutely. Well, multi-age, I think it's very easy for someone to understand that when you're in a multi-age setting, it really helps the younger children because the younger kid is going to look up to the older kid. They're going to want to emulate. They're going to want to run faster and climb higher, and it's going to stretch them. But it's harder to see what's going on when you have an older kid and there's younger kids around. And this is really applicable. You have a lot of kids, Lisa. So often it can be seen that the babies and the toddlers are kind of a pain or they're getting in the way of the learning. And you might think as a mom, oh, it would be so easy for me to teach my 7-year-old if I didn't have this toddler around. No, toddler wasn't crying and throwing a fit and making a mess. It would be easier if I wasn't nursing every 2 hours, if I wasn't up all night.
Mhm.
And so I think it's a little bit harder to see from that perspective why having younger children around is so beneficial for the older ones. So there is this program in Canada, and I learned about it from this woman named Michelle Borba, who wrote a book about empathy. Once again, empathy is one of those skills that these top companies are looking for. Empathy, creativity, and what they do in this program, it's called Roots of Empathy, is they hire out babies. They hire babies. They literally have a baby that will come into the classroom for 9 months, the whole school year, and they'll bring the baby in and the mom comes or the dad comes and they put the baby in the middle of the carpet and everyone's sitting around. And the point is to start to understand what is the baby feeling? And don't be too loud and don't move too fast and you might scare the baby and all of these different things. And the story that this Michelle told, which was so striking to me, was that one of the days, and this is middle school kids, one of the days this program ends and they can't find the baby. The baby is missing. This is a big deal. Where's the baby? And they find the baby over in the corner, and there's this young, 12-year-old, a middle school boy, like rocking the baby, bouncing with the baby. And he says to his teacher, he had come from a really hard life, if no one has ever loved you, can you still be a good father? And it's like, I mean, it really stuck with me because it's a reminder, just that little story of how much a baby or a toddler can affect you, your empathy, your emotions, how connected you can be to them. Obviously, babies and toddlers are going to let you know how they feel. Everyone else is concealing their emotions, but not the baby, not the toddler. And so you're learning how to be flexible and how to understand how someone else is feeling. And in the homeschool community, guess what? There's babies. There's babies. There aren't babies in the elementary school. The 5-year-olds seem like babies, when they first start off and they're so little. I mean, people talk about that. They seem so young, but they're not babies. They're not toddlers. And there are incredible benefits of older children spending time around those younger kids, even though it might feel chaotic in your home or chaotic in your community a little bit.
Well, that's a question that you get constantly when you have a large age range of kids, because we have basically 17 down to 0 is what we will have. And people constantly, that's how do you do school when you have babies and toddlers? And I just love this approach because it's a natural thing for those types of relationships to exist. And so, there must be some provision for this. There must be some way that this is beneficial and helpful. And that's like one of the number one things I get when we say we're having a baby is, your older kids, how unfair. And they make assumptions that aren't even necessarily true. That it must be this way if you have these kids and these kids. And I'm with you. I see relationships that are actually beneficial and helpful. And yes, if we're trying to do school at home, which I always make the distinction between school at home and then learning through everyday life, then yes, that would be very challenging to have a baby and sit down, do each grade level individually, but that's not necessarily what it looks like, right? Like it's so much more dynamic.
No, no, not at all. And what does that method come from? Where does that model come from? It's important to look into the history. I mean, is this what is best for child development? And I think what you just said is so pertinent, Lisa. How unfair. Because this is kind of how we started the conversation, which is, why are we only asking one side? Why aren't we saying to the third graders, how unfair that you don't get to spend any of your day with a toddler or a baby?
No, people aren't saying that.
The joy. I mean, there is so much joy. They're so fun. They're so funny, and you learn so much. And you have this sense. One of the chapters in the book is about that you are modeling. And I think this is a really big deal, that for the most part, childhood and adulthood are cut off from each other. You don't get a good sense necessarily of what adulthood is really like. And then all of a sudden you're there. Similar with entrepreneurship, similar with all of these other types of things where you get there and you're kind of like, I don't know what to do.
Never been around this before.
Yeah, my whole life was filled before this. And what do you learn when you're 14 years old and there's a baby in the house? Well, you learn how much time that takes. You learn how to rest and relax when you can. You learn what it's like to be pregnant and to take a break if you need to, or to put your feet up. You learn so much. You learn what life takes.
Yeah. Well, you talk about in the book something that you said when I read this, I thought, I wish I hadn't read, not really, but like there's things that you read and you're like, that's true. And now I have to act on it. But as adults, as parents, being lifelong learners and instilling that, just they see what you do, and to continue learning so that kids can see, okay, this is how you go from, I have this thought, this thing I want to do, and now I'm taking the steps to actually learn it, to implement it. That's something that you can't underestimate, them actually just being around. It's not part of the curriculum. They're just around adults who have to figure things out.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's what I read it. I read it when our oldest was like 8 or 9, and I was like, oh, I need to go back. And it was in this John Holt book, Learning All the Time, How Young Children Learn to Read, Write, Investigate the World, and Do Math Without Being Taught. And one of the premises of the book, and that's a very short book. I mean, it will change your life. I mean, you could read it probably in a day. It is a thin book. It's a cheap book. And he said, adults must use the skills they have so that kids can see them. Kids need some sense by which the processes of good work, they need to see it. How are the processes? How do you finish good work? How do you write a book? How do you build a table? How do you fix something? And they're so cut off from that they hit adulthood and they don't know. They don't know. And it was very convicting for me, Lisa, because I thought, I'm telling the kids, do this, be brave. And I thought, well, am I? Am I doing things and being brave? And I would say I sit here in part because of that little paragraph in that book I read, because as opportunities came along where I normally would have said no.
I'm too busy homeschooling.
For a couple reasons. One, Yes, yes, I'm shortchanging my kids, which I've really changed my view on. And two is because I'm nervous. I don't want to do something I'm nervous about. And yet I'm requiring my kids to. They don't want to talk to the waiter. They're nervous. It's littler things, but we push them, and yet maybe we aren't pushing ourselves. And I can see in hindsight how that has been so beneficial for our kids, surprisingly.
Well, you're a speaker. You speak at huge things. I did a first speaking engagement, which was a small thing, really small compared to you, maybe 2 years ago. And I didn't want to do it, but I was so looking forward to doing it because my kids were in the room and I was thinking, this is cool. Like they get to see me go up on the stage and address a room of people. I really don't want to do it, but it's a good opportunity. And if nothing else, they see, okay, I guess it's normal to like go up and do public speaking and things that you don't actually, want to do and step out of your comfort zone.
I mean, I totally agree. I totally agree. I mean, so much of life is doing things that you don't want to do. And when I speak, so, our kids are with us too. And one of my daughters is always like, they think it's really
Mm-hmm.
neat, right? I mean, it's pretty cool if it's your parent up there. And, sometimes they get little extra privileges or they get better seats or different things like that. And so one of my daughters is always like, Mom, are you so excited? Because she's excited. And I always say, no, I'm not excited. I'm super nervous. But you're modeling that for them. You're modeling walking through the doors that open for you and diving through the opportunities that come up, and then being able to have those conversations later about, oh, when we did that, it led to this. And what I noticed actually most when I first started, I made the change to say yes to opportunities that I normally wouldn't have. I became more empathetic toward my kids because it's hard to do new things. And a lot of childhood is doing new things. And it helped me to, I think, relate to them in a better way because now we're doing some things that are similar.
Yeah, that's very true. Most parents, when they are considering whether they should homeschool or not, have a fear about gaps in their children's education. How do you address this concern?
I mean, I don't even know where the comma goes. I don't know. I don't know where the comma
Yes.
goes. I can't spell.
Yep.
We just did this tour and we went and spoke at these different cities, and one of them was Cincinnati. And I was like, oh, that's really hard. Like, I
Yeah, I don't
don't
know if I
know
could.
how many N's and how many T's, and everybody has gaps. I just talked to this man, Matt Boudreau, and he brought up this really good point. He was talking about the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. He's like 99% of the population won't need that. But
No.
they learn it. They learn it anyways, right? Just in case you need it,
Yeah.
which is super easy to learn anyway. Just learn it later when you do need it. He said, but now I'm on a farm. We've been on a farm for a couple years. He said, we have a couple wells and I need to know how to fix a well or dig a well or do something with the well. But we don't teach everybody that.
That was
I
a
would
gap in
say,
his education.
yes, and
Too bad now he
probably
can't do it.
right. Probably more than 99% of, there's more people that need to know about wells than probably need to know about the Pythagorean theorem or, there's a lot of people that have wells. And so the point is there's so many things in life that you could learn and everybody has gaps. So what's supposed to happen? Well, you fill the gaps in when you need to. Everybody can do that. You fill them in when you need them. And also you fill them in your second pass through. I think when you have children or you're in these situations, maybe where you're a teacher or you're in a spot where you're having to guide another group of people through something, then you fill things in again then. There's not just one time to learn. It's not just 5 to 18. There's so much more life beyond that. And you can go back. You can go back and fill in the gaps that you had. We all left. I am an author who doesn't know where the comma goes.
Right. Well, you learn how to find the answers that you need. Like at some point you learned where the comma goes, but that wasn't something super relevant to your brain. So you figured out how to pass the test, you learned it and then it left you. So it's not that you didn't learn that. You went to regular school. I know that you learned where the comma
Yeah, so
goes.
everybody has the gaps. You have the
Yes.
gaps whether you go to the public school, whether you go to the private school, whether you're homeschool, everybody comes out with gaps. I mean, how could you possibly learn everything? It's sort of a ridiculous premise. And I also like the
Such a
idea of
ridiculous premise.
saving stuff. I mean, it's fun if you're like, I feel bad we've got this curriculum I bought right at the very beginning, because at the beginning you buy all these curriculums. And I found it on my shelf the other day, and it was this reading curriculum. And it was like this beautiful way to teach reading. And it was like, these are the books for second grade, and these are the books for third grade. And I thought, Lisa, oh my goodness, I missed. I mean, I've got a kid that's about to graduate in a year. We never read Little Bear. And we missed some of the third grade books. You can't go back. I can't go back now and be like, hey, we're going to sit down and, whatever, read the Gruffalo together. We're not going to do that. But, when he becomes a dad, he's going to go back and read some of the books that he didn't read.
You can check that off the list then.
Yes. Yeah, right. I'm going to be like that weird grandma that's like, hey, when you were in the second grade. So, you can't read everything, and it's nice to leave stuff to still be learned in adulthood.
Well, I also find it really funny that we think that if we teach kids something out of context, that they're going to carry it with them forever. I don't have a brain like that. I have to care. I can pass a test. I can memorize it, pass the test all day long. But I'm not a person that retains anything that's irrelevant to me at all, like until it's relevant to me. So I didn't have gaps because they told it to me, but then I came out with gaps because I didn't remember it. Like Pythagorean theorem, if you would have said, what's the Pythagorean theorem? I'd be like, remind me again? And then tell me even what that even is for. I think triangles maybe, but still, like, I don't.
Yeah, it is for triangles, but like, who's used it?
But
like, some people have.
Just because they tell you it, just because you've at one point seen it in a lecture or took a test does not mean it's not a gap in your education. I think it's funny that we don't put student agency, like we don't think that where their head is actually matters on this whole thing. Like as long as we say it to them, our hands are clean, there are no gaps. But the truth is that that's not necessarily meaning that they actually know it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Just like what? I'm not guilty. I gave them the information.
Yeah.
No, they're going to have gaps. Yeah. It's ridiculous. Okay. Daniel, I want to read this because this has always been one of my favorite quotes, but then when I post it, people get mad. So I don't post it that much because I don't like people getting mad. But this is Daniel Quinn. He says this: the people who are horrified by the idea that children learning what they want to learn when they want to learn it have not accepted the very elementary psychological fact that all people of every age, remember the things that are important to them, the things they need to know, and they forget the rest.
It's so obvious. Who doesn't do that? I mean, there are some people I would say who retain, there are certain my husband's more like this than me. He retains things that he hears. And so that's how his personality is. But me, if it's irrelevant, you might as well have never even told it to me because it just will be completely lost on me. So yeah.
Yeah. So there's just gaps. I mean, that's life. I mean, we're going to all die.
We know
and have
this,
gaps
but yet
things that we didn't learn.
We don't like the idea for some reason. It should be a weight off our shoulders because also, like you said, it doesn't have to happen between 5 and 18. Like that's not when you have to learn. Every person, no matter what their educational background is, if you took a measure of the things that they know, the amount that you learn between 18 and death has to be so significantly more than 5 to 18 for everybody, no matter what your education style is. So why don't we realize that?
Right. It doesn't end. It's like we have this graduation cutoff date. It's like, time's up.
No more learning for me.
Yeah. No. And I think that part about modeling, it's showing your kids that you just continue to learn. So there's no panic.
Right.
When Luke and I were first married 17 years ago, we were on a super tight budget, and the only way that I could decorate my home and make it my own cozy space was by doing a lot of DIY and sewing. I've shared that for years on my YouTube channel, on this podcast, on my blog, and recently I put all of those resources together, all of the patterns, the tutorials, and then step-by-step instructions from getting a machine and threading it, learning about tension issues and the bobbin, all those things maybe over the years that have scared you away from sewing, into one course that I've called the Simple Sewing Series. If you've wanted to sew but have been intimidated by the process of getting started, or even if you're a more seasoned seamstress or sewist and you want to improve your skills, I really think that this will be a great resource for you. There's also a private community associated with it, so if you have sewing questions or you're excited to meet other people who are also getting started on their sewing journey, that's available with the course as well, and it's for a very very affordable price. You can find my new course and all of the resources that go along with it over at bit.ly/simple sewing course. That's bit.ly/simple sewing course, all lowercase. That's where you can find more info and become a student.
For parents who are on the fence about homeschooling, what's the one thing you wish they understood before making their decision?
I think, you can't have hindsight until you're there. But I would say that every single person I've talked to who's homeschooled and not quit would say, and myself included, I don't regret it for 1 second. And if I could do it all over again, I would 1000% choose to do it the same way, even with, learning the philosophy as you go. I didn't know anything about educational philosophy when we started. You don't know. You know what you grew up with. I didn't even know there was other educational philosophies. And even so, even not having all the information and not knowing the things that I know now, I do not regret for 1 second. I think that kids thrive at home, and so do parents when their kids are at home. There is a different way that you connect. You don't have these teenage problems that people complain about all the time. Like our girls were going to this youth group for a little bit. That turned out to be a disaster, but they were in their and that's a story for a different day. But they, in their little small group, the girls would come. They were middle school, and my girls would say, "Mom, all everybody talks about is how much they fight with their moms."
Yeah.
I was like, then they were confused. They were like, "What? Why would they fight?" They would go this, "Why would they fight with their moms? What are they fighting with their moms about?" Right? And it was like, Dan, it's just a completely different family dynamic. And I think that's one of the things that we can't totally understand when we haven't lived it, is that you envision it being like this butting of heads, where when you were in school, like you talked about earlier, someone's telling you today is the day you're writing the comic book, and that's not the day you want to write the comic book. So you have this butting of heads, and it's a struggle. And it's just not. It's not that. You're kind of growing together. Yeah, are there days where, there's a little bit of a struggle? Kind of, but really hardly. I mean, it has just been mostly a joy, and the sort of day-to-day minutia doesn't matter that much.
Yeah, I've heard this called different things. My friend Julie Crakey calls it delight-directed learning, and I had her on the show to talk about that. And I think it's really easy to be very, very skeptical of people wanting to learn things. And we know people do, but children wanting to learn things until you've seen it happen. I mean, it's hard to imagine that kids would want to do a creative writing project without your prompting, but I'm with you.
But it does happen.
Yeah.
It does happen. In fact, one of the reasons that I wrote the book, Lisa, is because with 1,000 hours outside, and that's how we spent early childhood, we're getting outside, and we're not doing all of this sort of prep work for kindergarten. We didn't do anything. We didn't do like people do. They buy these pre-K workbooks and things. We didn't do any of that. And what I learned is that our kids are biologically designed to self-educate, like Dr. Peter Gray says, and they're out learning stuff, and they're learning and they're growing, and I don't have to prompt it. And a lot of people have written in over the years and said that foundation gave me the confidence to know that I could homeschool, because I saw that I could trust my kids and I could kind of pass the baton to them, and they're going to take that education and run with it. And so I'm going to tell you one story. I'm not quite sure where we're at on time. Are you normally done?
Oh, we're
by
doing
now?
good. Yeah.
Okay.
We're good.
So this is a story. And this is, I think, what you can't know. You can't know when you first start homeschooling where the end path is. But we have our oldest daughter, we've talked about this. She's like fine with me sharing these stories, but she was kind of one where I was like, oh, maybe I'm doing this wrong. She just wasn't quite catching on the spelling and, just different things. And one of the days when the kids were younger, we got these science kits, and I was supposed to help to promote these science kits. They were pretty cool. So, we're sitting down to do these science kits, and I'm taking these videos, and she was like, I am so excited to learn chemistry. And I was like, oh, it's chemistry, that type of a thing, right? Where you're like, oh, they're missing, right? There's gaps.
Yeah, but you just said chemistry to her, and then that was that gap taken care of.
Yeah, taken care of. But, there was a gap, and you think, oh, gosh, she's probably too old to not know that it's pronounced chemistry and not chemistry. So, and she was saying like chef's salad. So like, this is something we need to learn. It's chef's salad. So we're in this spot, and I'm kind of thinking, oh, I don't totally know if this is working. And anyway, when she turned 14, she decided that she wanted to become a personal trainer. And so she came to me and she said, Mom, I want to be a personal trainer. She said, I've done some research on it. And there is this man named Joe Drake, and he teaches the National Academy for Sports Medicine. He teaches their personal training class, and I want to take his class. And will you please call him and ask if I can take it, even though I'm only 14? So I call this guy I don't know, and I say, my daughter's 14, and can she take the class? And he says, no problem. We've never had anybody that young take it, but if she's interested, she can take this class. So we signed her up for this class. She gets this textbook in the mail. Now, this is a girl who calls it chemistry, and I'm thinking, I don't know what's happening. This textbook is, it's 4 or 5 inches thick about the human body and all of the different body parts. And she does this Zoom class with all adults. She's the only kid, and she's 14. She's in middle school, 14 years old. She takes the class, and I see her. She's like on Zoom. She's unmuting to say the answer. She knows all these words. I don't know. And then when she finished the class, she was 15, and she had to take a test. You have to take a test to pass. And we had to go to a testing center so that you don't cheat. So we show up at this testing center. I've never been to a testing center in my life. It's all adults. And Lisa, she had never taken a test.
Yeah.
So different states have different rules, right? In Michigan, testing isn't required. And so this was her first test she'd ever taken in a class that she was interested in with all adults. And I couldn't even stay in the place because it's mostly adults. You just got to drop off and wait in the parking lot. And she comes out, 45 minutes later with her little paper that says passed it. And she is a certified personal trainer through the National Academy of Sports Medicine. And I kind of want to say I had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
But also I want to say I had a lot to do with it because this is the environment.
Mm-hmm.
The environment gave her the confidence, the freedom to figure out what she's interested in, to say, I think I can do this, and to go and do something that only adults were doing. And when she passed, I texted the instructor, and he said, I've got 2 little girls, and I sure hope they turn out like her someday.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's such an encouraging story. And you see that with kids, and it can go anywhere from personal trainer. Kids find their own interests, and they vary so widely. Like, how'd she come up with that? My 2 daughters, they're the 2 peas in a pod, and they are obsessed with like dressmaking. And so they have a dress form, and they're making corsets, and they've got boning, and they've got grommets. And I don't know how to do the stuff that they're doing. They watch YouTube videos on historic dresses, like it's way beyond me because I don't personally care about stuff like that. But that's the whole thing, is you don't have to. You have to give them the resources that they need. You had to take her to that testing center, get her the class, and then the rest was just up to her. And when it was something she was interested in, she can pass the test. She can figure out how to spell the words, right?
Mm-hmm. And so then, we talk about the dressmaking. You talk about, becoming a personal trainer. I mean, I've talked with so many people. This one's working with horses. This one's running a camp.
Yeah.
That is the type of person that can navigate 6 careers.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because they've learned how to navigate one, and they're a kid. So they would be able to learn how to navigate. And this man named, what's his name? Jerry Kaplan is his name. And he wrote a book called Generative Artificial Intelligence, What Everybody Needs to Know. And he's been working with artificial intelligence for decades. I had no idea that artificial intelligence was even in the works,
Yeah.
but it's been in the works for a long, long time. So this man has been working, and he teaches at Stanford. And he says in his book that the jobs of the future are more human, not less human. He says his wife only buys things off of Etsy. She wants that like handmade element.
Yeah.
She doesn't want to get the thing from Temu,
Right.
and the thing that everybody else has, the plastic, whatever. Like, she wants there to be a human touch to it. And so the fact that your girls are making these dresses, like, there is always going to be a market for that. There's always going to be a market for the human interaction. There's going to be a market for personal trainer because people want a human connection, and they don't want to always do things on screens.
Right.
They're sick of the screens. And so these are the types of kids. I think what's tricky, though, is that when they're 4, you can't know. You don't know the outcome.
Right.
And maybe that's part of the fun.
It is part of the fun if you can trust the process. And I think a book like yours is such an encouragement. Reading through it, I'm thinking, man, there are so many young homeschooler moms who need this book, because you get so overwhelmed with those basic early learning things like reading and math, the things that you have to learn. And you think, how will I ever do this? And I think that just having the encouragement from those who have gone before you and that you're doing it right just by doing it, I think is a very powerful message. Tell the listeners where to follow along with you and then where to get your brand new book, which is out now, by the way.
Yes. Yeah. So everything I do is at 1,000 hours outside. And it's like kind of make it easy. It's all 1,000 hours outside. And then the
Right.
title of this book is Homeschooling. That's the actual title. The rest of it is a subtitle. So I actually think that's really funny. So all you have to do is like type in homeschooling. It's going to come up. But I have 1,000 hours outside. We've got a website and an app and a podcast and all of those types of things. And then the book is called Homeschooling. And I have another book called Until the Streetlights Come On, which we've talked
so
about as
good.
well.
I love
It's
both
similar,
your books.
it's a similar premise. And I hope it gives permission for you to homeschool the way you want to homeschool and to do life the way you want to do life. I really wanted to give across the message. It's like sometimes we idolize, even in the homeschool world, Lisa, I think you would relate with this. We idolize like the free, like the family that's just out in the meadow. But also if you're the type A mom that likes a boxed curriculum and and you want to do it in a systematic way, like there isn't a wrong way to do it. And you are passing on your genetics to your kids.
Yeah. So they're going to probably like that too.
Yes. Yes. And there's pluses and minuses to all of it. If you're a minimalist mom, if you're not a minimalist mom, that's the whole point. It doesn't have to look like your neighbor. It doesn't have to look like mine. Doesn't have to look like yours. Maybe you have a single child. You've got one child you're homeschooling. Maybe you have 14 kids and they're going to keep having kids. Maybe you're somewhere in the middle. All of those little details don't matter. They don't. You're going to do, however you do it is the way to do it. And the same with Until the Streetlights Come On. It's like, look, you can opt out and you can choose. You can choose your own path towards success and you can trust that it's going to work out for your family.
Well, there's so much freedom in that. And I think that's what we're missing in the conversation of homeschooling and how we raise our kids, which you go more into that and Until the Streetlights Come On, just the freedom that you have as a parent and then the freedom for the kids. It's all very encouraging. So thank you so much, Ginny.
Thank you so much for having me. Truly, it's an honor. I love what you're doing and so appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, as always, for listening to the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast. My husband Luke and I and our 8 kids work together side by side on our little homestead and use our blog, podcast, and YouTube channel to reach other homemakers, home cooks, and homesteaders with practical recipes in daily family life. For everyday sourdough recipes, make sure to check out our blog, farmhousehomeboon.com, and to dig deeper, we do also offer a course called Simple Sourdough over at bit.ly/farmhouse sourdough course. That's all one word, bit.ly/farmhouse sourdough course. If you're looking to learn how we earn an income online, check out my YouTube course at bit.ly/farmhouse YouTube course, all one word.